पहले ये दोनों प्रूफ खत्म हो जाएंगी, उसके बाद किसी प्रूफ की बात हो सकती है।
देखिए, अपराधी थोड़ी ना तय करेगा कि उनके खिलाफ आरोप कौन तय करेगा और अपराध पता लगाने के लिए क्या प्रक्रिया होगा।
The point is, do you want to correct the system, do you want to improve the system, do you want to regulate the system, or you want to keep the system in such an anarchy that people can keep making money? And this is crony capitalism. This is exactly what is crony capitalism.
Good evening, you're with We Mean Business. I'm Shweta Rajpal-Kohli, and as the war over coal allocation continues, the BJP is insisting on its demand for cancellation of the coal blocks. On the show today, we're asking if the demand of the BJP to cancel all the coal blocks is feasible and will it help diffuse the current political crisis. Let me introduce our guests on the show today. We've got Mr. Mani Shankaraya, former Union Minister, Dr. Subramanian Swamy, President of the Janata Party, Nalin Kohli, National Executive Member of the BJP, Mr. Narendra Taneja, well-known energy expert, and Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, Assistant Professor of Finance at the Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. We'll also be joined in by our energy correspondent Rajkumar Sahu shortly. Let's start first by taking a look at what exactly the Finance Minister P. Chidambaram had to say with regard to the entire issue. He insists that the demand for the Prime Minister's resignation is outrageous and that the policy that they are following is the policy that has been continuing for many, many years now. Let's listen in.
I think it's widely accepted that the demand for the resignation of the Prime Minister is an outrageous demand. The demand for cancelling all 142 blocks allocated after 2004 is not founded on sound logic. The demand for an inquiry is a bit belated because the CBI has already commenced an inquiry. An inquiry is underway. If you look at all coal blocks allocated prior to 2004 and after 2004, because I don't see why 2004 is a cut-off date. The policy has been in force since 1993. If the policy is flawed, it has been flawed since 1993.
Mr. Mani Shankaraya, let me start by asking you if the demand of the BJP to actually go ahead and cancel all those 142 coal blocks is feasible, is practical. Are we going to see any movement in that direction?
Where have they made this demand? On the streets, they made it from public platforms, they made it in front of television cameras, but they have not made it in the one place where it is required to be made, which is the floor of the House. And if they made that demand on the floor of the House, the arguments which are behind their point would be elaborated by them. The government would have the opportunity of responding to that, and other parties would have the opportunity of putting in their inputs. But this business of wrecking the temple of democracy in order to get sound bites on television, I think is so misplaced and so destructive of the institutions of our democracy that first and foremost we need to condemn the BJP for misusing their strength inside Parliament, and I would really request the presiding officers of the two houses to throw these people out if they will not listen to proper parliamentary procedure and get on with the business of running Parliament. As regards the substance of that demand, first, I am not acquainted with the logic behind it because I had not seen it elaborated. But in any case, it does appear to me that before you can press such a demand, you have to explain why a policy that is apparently flawed in 2004 is not flawed between 1993 and 2004.
All right, so very important points that are being made there by Mr. Manishankar Iyer, and who better than the BJP to actually answer some of those points? Why not allow a debate to happen is the first question.
Thank you, Shweta, and I'd like to respond to three specific things that Mr. Iyer has raised. The first, of course, he has spoken about the temple of democracy and that he has alleged that the BJP is undermining it. I think it would do well for him to reflect on the undermining of democracy with the kind of corruption like termites killing the very fabric of India's infrastructure, killing the fabric of India's social infrastructure and things like that. That's
why
one.
not allow
No, let's go one by one. Second is, he has also brought in a fascinating point that he would like to request the presiding officers of the two houses to throw out the BJP, which is, I think, a fascinating example of how the Congress would like to view the temple of democracy, as he just called it so eloquently. And the fact remains, this is exactly what the Congress party has been doing with the Parliament through and through. Whenever they are constantly using the excuse debate to put a lid on accountability. We have seen it with the JPC, we have seen it with the PAC, including perverse demands in terms of calling people who are dead. It's almost a resurrection from the grave if you would look at it, and other things like that. And the third is about the substance that Mr. Iyer has referred to, and I'd like to draw your attention to the substance. I think first of all is, there has been wrongdoing. We have got concrete examples in the report that speaks about what a sham the screening committee was. People who had not even applied. There 2 were called, 6 were allotted. Ministers and their kin seem to have immediately got coal blocks within a 24-hour notice. And when you look at it in the period from 1993 to 2004, Mr. Jaitley recently, and if I recall on an interview on your very channel, pointed out that about 70 blocks were given in that period as compared to 142 now. And the big changer was the Electricity Act of 2003. And the most important point is, here is a policy that the Prime Minister himself as the coal minister advocated a change in 2004, which was nixed by his own Prime Minister's office. So I think Mr. Iyer would do well to reflect on what's the wrongdoings at their end.
Let me go across to Dr. Subramanian Swamy, because Dr. Swamy, while we do understand that there are important implications of that CAG report on coal that have been pointed out and have been raised, at the same time, not allowing a debate to take place is actually not allowing the democratic system to work. Why not discuss and debate all these issues not on national television channels, not outside the parliament, but on the floor of the house?
Well, that sounds theoretically nice, but we know that in the Jan Lokpal bill discussion, what a sham it was. And all these arguments about contracts and legal implications and the consequences, we heard it in the 2G license matter. The Supreme Court, it wasn't decided in Parliament. There were plenty of debates on 2G spectrum in the Parliament, but nothing happened. During the motion on the President's address, the Prime Minister made an eloquent defense of whatever had happened. But ultimately it was the courts which did it. It was outside the Parliament. So consequently, I think the BJP is taking the correct decision that this is something now which doesn't require a debate, and it's quite clear because the government itself for a large number of blocks has issued notice why their licenses should not be cancelled. Now whether only those should be cancelled who have not performed, or all of them because they shouldn't have got it in the first place, I think the principle has been laid down in the 2G spectrum matter in the Supreme Court. And now they have a committee called the Ashok Chawla Committee of 12 secretaries who have recommended that under no circumstances for these natural resources we should use, when you are exploiting them for commercial purposes, you should go have any other method except auction, and the government has accepted those recommendations. So I think why should we have a debate at all? It's a waste of time.
That those recommendations have been accepted by this very government. The government does realize that auction is the best way forward. It has been talking about that route, but simply going ahead and saying, you know what, just cancel all those coal block allocations. Are we even discussing the economic impact or something like that? Mr. Iyer, a quick response from you before I go to the other panelists.
I cannot accept arguments from people who are not in Parliament but are using the courts. They're welcome to continue using the courts. But you cannot say that you
they don't belong in
of the
Parliament,
principal opposition party, which is not even supported by other opposition parties. If they won't have a debate, then why should anyone accept what conclusions they come to? And as regards the substance of the issue, number one, insofar as wrongdoing is concerned, there's already an inquiry on. Number two, the Prime Minister, poor man, was forced to lay his statement on the table of the House. But I do think Parliament should function. Supposing they close down your channel for 2 years, wouldn't you feel upset? Well, my channel, the Rajya Sabha, has been closed for almost all the time that I've been a Rajya Sabha member. I object to this. Totally.
Mr. Swamy was saying something.
Okay, Dr. Swamy, go ahead, make your point before I let Nalin respond.
I would like to say, see, if you are starting categorizing people, then I'll say those who are nominated to Parliament, they are just decorations for Parliament. They shouldn't be speaking on behalf of Parliament at all. Let them first go and get elected properly.
Okay, let's not make this a personal attack, but there's a larger issue at stake right now. And
well, what do you mean when it's a question of you have to control it from the very beginning.
Okay.
Where is the question? Courts are part of the Constitution.
Okay, we're discussing the larger issue of the interest of the country, because here you've got just about every industry chamber going and issuing a statement saying, are we not understanding the negative impact this would have on the country? Remember, this is a time when the country needs its economy to be revived, and while there should be no tolerance and zero tolerance for corruption, is there not important need now to move on, let Parliament function, let this debate happen in Parliament, and then decide what needs to be done and punish the wrongdoers? Now,
look, I think there are multiple issues here, Shweta. The first is about punishing the wrongdoers. If we look at the 2G scam, and Dr. Swamy himself can add lots to this debate, is on the 2G scam, the government constantly gave certificates of innocence to their own coalition partners, Mr. Raja, till finally the Supreme Court intervened. The CBI sat for 16 months and did not move till the Supreme Court intervened. That's one. Second is, when you look at the Congress has always gone alibi shopping and has always laid the blame either on coalition Dharma or on their allies. And when they were asking the resignation, and when they took the resignations of Mr. Dayanidhi Maran and of Mr. Raja, the same rules apply even now. Because here you've got the Prime Minister as the coal minister. And the final point is that under what has happened, I think the key issue about the economy is that the government has an accountability and responsibility to the people to provide a clean, transparent administration, not to promote crony capitalism, and certainly you're not going to allow wrongdoing to be overlooked just because the government feels that this is better and we start hiding behind plans on economic development.
We need to also have an understanding of how the economy really works. What we're talking about really is, if you simply go ahead and deallocate these coal blocks, what is the kind of impact that we're going to see on power plants, on the functioning of the overall economy, the kind of losses that we're talking about, and what about honoring those contracts really? What's the kind of negative impact it will carry on the image of the country?
Shweta, there are two sides of the whole story. I think first of all, it's a very important issue. You don't necessarily have to be a member of parliament to raise this issue. I think every Indian has a right to discuss the issue because it involves some irregularities. I'm not saying that wrongdoings are well established, but there is doubt that something like that has happened. So I think it's first of all. Second thing is that, it is very important that we go for a fast track investigation, let's say in a period of within 2 months and 3 months, and establish if there are any wrongdoing. And if there are any wrongdoings, it's important to really scrap the whole thing, cancel all the blocks. Simply
but if there are, that investigation has to happen.
Absolutely. And secondly, what is very important, in any case, Shweta, last 2.5 years, what you have said, there is a complete policy paralysis, and flip-flop on Vodafone issue, flip-flop on GERR issue, we have seen the country's image has actually suffered a tremendous damage already. So I think, what is important is, and Shweta, probably the most important point, can you really build India into an economic superpower when the foundations are actually full of wrongdoings, corruption, favoritism and all that? So I think if you really, give me one example in the history of the world where you have been really able to make a nation, a kind of great nation on weak foundations. So I think what is important is to go for a thorough and honest investigation first. Before, and if it's established that for 2 blocks or 20 blocks or 50 blocks, there have been some wrongdoing is very important. The
But that is different from saying cancel all the 142 blocks. That demand,
how can you cancel? First of all, I think no political party, including Bharatiya Janata Party or for that matter any political party, has moral right really to give such a call, because
now you respond to that.
All parties scam if it's a scam.
I take strong no.
How do you respond to the fact that there are coal blocks that were allocated before 2004, and the point that Mr. Manishankar Ayar was also making there, a point that Mr. Kapil Sibal has also made today, which I will play out shortly.
Ministers have been writing letters.
Sure, I'm going to come.
And
so it is.
BJP ruled states have been part of the steering committee.
So the moral high ground that the BJP seems to be taking is this exactly such a strong ticket?
Yes, certainly it is, and I'm going to give you facts. We'll not go on emotion and talk on facts. If I'd also like to quote Mr. Sri Prakash Jaiswal, who on 21st December 2009 on the floor of the House of Parliament is himself said that majority of the states were in favor of the competitive bidding process. Number 2 is Mr. Raman Singh has recently, Dr. Raman Singh has come out with his statement and pointed out his questions are related to the fact that if a coal block is in his area, then why don't they have to have basically the state government must have a right or must have a share in the revenue, because it's after all exploited out of there. And what happens to the industry in that state? Number 3 is, if you're talking of the moral point, I want to make
yes,
one second, I'm coming to the moral point. If you will recall, Mr. Jaitley recently said that we as a government, when we were faced with a similar situation with the allocation of petrol pumps and gas agencies, we went for complete, because here the question and the credibility of a government is at stake, a process is at stake, and when you have, and when you, because I would also, yes, no, I would, Mr.
Why were you silent for long?
Yes, I would like to correct. Yes, I would like to correct.
You are a rich party, you are sitting on 1,000 crores of cash pile. You could really actually go for your own investigation. You've got members of parliament, well-educated members of parliament sitting there. You are fully aware of what's going on. Why did you really boycott parliament?
And if you will,
why didn't you raise the issue?
If you will just let me answer that, I would like to draw your attention to this, that the fact is,
one letter,
not one, I'm sorry, and no, it's not 2. It's a multiple letters starting from 2007 by Mr. Hansraj Ahir. Mr. Prakash Javadekar is there, and I would like you to go and see these letters duly responded. They are not 2. No, Mr. No, they were 2 gentlemen representing. No, I'm sorry.
Not a BJP. Did you pass a resolution?
Okay, let me.
You are. That is. I'm sorry. You can't give us. You cannot. I am sorry. What do you mean individual members? They are members. I'm sorry. A member of parliament.
You were quiet.
If I
for long point out, you were quiet.
No, I would like you are free. But let me just put this. Okay, if you want to know, I'd like to put this clear.
Okay, let's have
I want to make this clear. You can take anything. When a member of parliament of the BJP raises a point, may I please finish my point? May I please finish my point? May I please finish?
Give me one example.
With the BJP, 2G, yes, if you would look at 2G, CWG, no, why not? We have been doing our job as a this. No, you may want to seek to.
Okay,
no, I'm sorry. You cannot make this charge on the political party as this.
Political opportunism. Okay, we have to end this here because we have to take the discussion forward. Political opportunism clearly on part of the BJP. Enough ammunition that has been given by the CAG in that report. But Dr. Subramanian Swamy, my question to you is it fair to set the 2G case as a precedent for coal allocation? Because in that case, there were clear examples of the wrongful manner in which licenses were given, and you of course have led that campaign. In this case, you cannot just do an apple-to-apple comparison that this happened in 2G, so we're going to apply the same logic to Colgate and insist on the Prime Minister's resignation. You have to treat each case and each scam differently.
Listen, you have got it all mixed up. Where the issue before the Supreme Court, which led to the cancellation, was whether the government forewent or gave up revenue which they would have got had they auctioned it. That's all. That was the question which led to the cancellation. The question of wrongdoing is in the trial court. It's not in the Supreme Court, and therefore to say that there this 2G was different is wrong. And here too, everybody knows the price that was charged was very, very low, and that had you auctioned it, you would have got enormous amount of revenue. And that's what the Chawla committee is now saying. The government says that we are adopting it. So what is the difficulty? If you have made a wrong decision, you have a right under the clauses of the contract on public interest, you can cancel the licenses. The same argument was used for 2G until we pointed out that one of the clauses in the license was that in the interest of public interest, the government can change the allocation of licenses. It can even cancel it. The same thing is here in this contract. Every contract has it when government does it. So it's totally wrong for you to say that the question of wrongdoing. Wrongdoing is a matter for criminal prosecution.
Krishnamurti Subramanian, my question to you really is that the government has been giving one defense after another in this entire matter. They've of course first of all questioned CAG's calculations, which we're going to discuss in great detail also later on the show. They've also said, we heard the finance minister earlier say that well, if coal has not been mined, where is the question of loss? Explain to us if there's merit in the arguments that the government has been giving.
Yeah, Shweta, I want to just zoom into the economics of the argument. There are two important questions here. One, the fact that, so the argument has been put forward, since 1993, if we did not auction the coal blocks, why do it from 2004? The second is essentially about the contracts, whether or not the contracts need to be, can they be reneged or not, what will be the cost to the economy. And third, essentially the difference being given by the, by the government based on the numbers put forward by the CAG. Now I want to respond to each one of them. First, let me start with this argument that if we did not auction since 1993, why do it in 2004? So first remember that, the price of coal was about $30 and about $25 to $30 up until 2003, and the cost of production was about similar, $30. So really, till 2003, up until China did not really take off and the coal price did not increase, the economic value essentially was not as much. Starting from 2004 onwards, the coal price essentially became $60 and then peaked at $180 in 2008. Even now, we're looking at a price of about $100 to $105. Compared to the production cost of about $30, even if you essentially take into account an escalation of about 50%, that makes it about $45 per ton. What we're talking about is the value from the coal block is enormous. Okay, so now, a policy that worked from 1993 to 2003 was based on essentially the fact that the value was not that much because the coal price was not that high. But starting from 2004 onwards, coal blocks have become enormously valuable. And therefore, the argument of essentially selling or giving them away for free is not based on good economic grounds.
Why are you taking 2004 as the cutoff? Why are you taking 2004 as the cutoff?
Because the price essentially because the price in that period essentially starts from $60 onwards starts going up. Till 2003, the price was about 30. So the production cost and the price of coal really sort of netted off each other really. So the economic value of those coal blocks were not that high. But starting from 2004, the coal price essentially starts going much above the production cost. Now, if the revenue is more than the cost, what you're looking at is substantial profits. And when you present value the future profits, you have essentially value of the coal block.
Okay, Nalin has a point to make very quickly, Nalin.
Just to add to what Krishnamurti is saying, just one quick point, that essentially 2004 is the cutoff here.
Right, Krishnamurti, I'll just come back to you.
Just 2004 also, I mean, he's absolutely right about the point, but in addition to it, 2004 becomes the cutoff point because that's the year when the Prime Minister, as Coal Minister, speaks about going for competitive bidding, and 3 months later, his PM order.
It's that government which is talking about competitive bidding. Nalin, you have to give them credit for at least having brought it up, and not the NDA government.
So I think, why don't we also give them credit that the Prime Minister either permitted all this to happen or did not prevent it from happening, or there was policy paralysis. Why it took 8 years?
Okay, and of course the logic of many NDA states also not agreeing to the competitive bidding process.
Yes, I can answer this again.
Okay, I have to go across to my colleague Rajkumar Sahu, who has been tracking this story very closely, because Raj, there is a move on part of the government to now go ahead possibly and cancel some of those non-performing blocks. Here, of course, the logic that is being given is this is an inquiry that has been going on. This is a committee that was the Inter-ministerial panel which was set up by the UPA government itself, and the reason for actually cancellation is non-performance. Take us through some of the reasons that are being cited, and what is it that we can really expect?
Shweta, of course, the reasons are has nothing to do with either the CBI inquiry or the CAG report. We are here talking about on the merit of those coal blocks. What if you see what we have accessed through the internal note of the Inter-ministerial panel or all those panels, basically is that they are saying that these coal blocks have not done even the minimum work of applying for forest and land and environmental clearance. So how come they will get any kind of clearances, or how can they start coal production from those blocks by March 2013? So that is the basic logic that the interministerial group is basically seeing. They are not going into the CBI or CAG inquiry. And remember, Shweta, one thing, that this IMG, that interministerial panel, was actually formed much before the CBI inquiry or the CAG report. We are talking about this interministerial panel which actually issued show cause notices much before the CAG report was tabled. So there was nothing to do with the CAG report or the CBI inquiry. It is basically that they wanted to clarify on the things that you have not done the work, you have not followed the timeline, so we are going to cancel it. And probably because on basis of that, these 60 blocks are going to be cancelled. And remember, these 60 blocks we are talking about are not only those coal blocks which were actually allocated by the UPA regime since 2004. So these are also coal blocks. 7 of them were also allocated by the India regime since 1999. So there's nothing to do with the CBI or CBC inquiry. So let's see what happens. But yes, it is the interministerial panel is going to do its own analysis and its own appraisal based on the merit of the development of those coal blocks. Or we are talking here about 60 coal blocks. Shweta.
Raj, do stay with us, and I want to go across to Mr. Manishankar Iyer and at least try and understand that why is it that we've not seen private players and the government coming down heavily on these private players earlier, because the logic that was being given to hand over some of these coal blocks to the private players really was the fact that Coal India is not being able to manage the production. And now that we've seen private players fail miserably as well, the government should have acted sooner and come down heavily on these companies.
I'd just like to answer your question in a minute. I first want to compliment Mr. Nalin on the excellent set of arguments that he has placed before this TV channel. I want to know why he can't place it on the House in Parliament and give the government the opportunity to answer those charges and to either fall flat on their face or to succeed in explaining why they did what they did. As regards the cancellation of the blocks, I think the fact is that because Coal India could not manage it properly, it was believed, in keeping with the philosophy of this government since 1991, that the private sector can always do a job that is better than the public sector can do. But it's clear that the private sector, at least in this segment of the economy, has also fallen flat on its face. And therefore, if there is consideration being given, since long before the presentation of the CAG report, to the cancellation of those blocks where appropriate action has not been taken to implement the contract, then that's fine, and I see no contradiction between that and the policy that was initially initiated. And also I do wish to stress that when we have serious questions of center-state relations, especially for a coalition government, and where we are told repeatedly that we must not only take opposition parties into account, we must even take our own allies into account in determining what the next step should be, it would have been absurd for the government of India to have ignored the written advice and the stated arguments of the representatives of the state governments, who range across every party. They include the Congress, but they include the BJD, they do include the BJP, they even include the CPM, who argued that no, they didn't want that kind of a thing, they wanted to use the mechanism that had already been established. And that was why we couldn't move forward. Now it's all very well to say today that they should have done that then, but then had we done it then, we'd have been accused of just trying to road roller the opposition states and the opposition parties. I do hope the presiding officers take some note of the fact that one opposition party, without even support from other opposition parties, is simply blocking the functioning of Parliament, which it has absolutely no right to do. And as for Dr. Subramanian Swamy, he is a well-known agitationist in the courts of law. Let him continue doing that. I'd like to really point out that I never said that you cannot discuss these issues outside Parliament. What I said is members of Parliament should be discussing these issues inside Parliament. And of course the outside world is more than free to make its comments on what it needs to be done. And finally, with regard to Mr. Chidambaram's statement that Mr. Chidambaram has explained that he never used the expression zero loss, what he said was that if the coal has not been mined, where does the cost question of loss arise? He could equally have said that since the coal has not been mined, where does the question of profit arise? He was just making the factual point that the coal is still to be mined, and that the issue really is that when you decided that the private sector would be able to do the job that the public sector cannot do, at that point we would have expected far greater efficiency. And my final point is that you were covering me when I was Minister of Petroleum, and you saw the extent to which we used to secure all the required defense and environmental clearances before we put up blocks for auction. And that's exactly what should be done with respect to coal. I don't think allotment should be made and then the process of clearance is short. The clearances should first be obtained by the government, and then the block should be put up for auction or whatever other method is decided upon by government.
It's a political crisis really. The country is now getting impatient. We really need to get on with the business of the house. We're seeing that the monsoon session has ended up being a complete washout. Where, according to you, is this political crisis headed? We're not seeing the BJP or the UPA government actually achieve a compromise position.
Yeah. It is a question of perception. We are of the view, those in the NDA, that this government is now thoroughly discredited as the most corrupt government in the history of India, and that they have no intention of discussing anything in Parliament. They are just using Parliament discussion as an excuse. When the question of George Fernandez came, these same arguments were never used. Why can't you say what you want to say against George Fernandez in the floor of Parliament? Now, today there is no gain from having a discussion at all. If you think that Parliament is going to come to some conclusion through a discussion, we have seen what happened in the Jan Lokpal bill. So today the country wants action.
Mr. Taneja, is that a logical argument?
Because Parliament doesn't.
The Parliament is meant.
No. You see,
well, I am not talking about logical arguments. I am talking about political arguments. We think
even
today Parliament is
a party that finds itself
a complete
isolated.
effect institution.
Even politically,
yeah, it's an emergency. What did we think of Parliament in the emergency?
Just like the
we thought it was a captive organization.
What is important is there are issues. I think it's important we take those issues to Parliament, because after all, Parliament is a house elected by the people of this country. If the issue is so important that the future of the government is this government is at stake, I think it's even more important to discuss that on the floor of Parliament. Because after all, we call it the tamper.
Why, that may be your view. I don't think that is anything to discuss.
Okay, Nalin.
Well, that's your personal view. That's your personal view. I can have my own views, but I think this Parliament, the Parliament is always elected by the people of this country.
It is the view of the NDA. Where is the question of personal view? This is the view of the NDA.
BJP finds itself totally isolated as the opposition party, and Nalin, and the point that Mr. Iyer has also raised, and the point that everybody is raising right now, is you find yourself completely isolated. And we know we've heard the term majestic isolation, but clearly you need to at least allow some sort of a debate on this issue, simply because nobody is saying that your demands should not be met. Nobody is saying that what you're raising is invalid, but just simply, and we're talking about the last week of Parliament now, this session. When do we see you actually becoming a little more reasonable about the issue and allowing this debate?
I'd like to first of all say that let's get the facts clear. What we are talking here is not about the niceties about Parliament functioning. Yes, Mr. Jaitley in his article has pointed out that Parliament, yes, debates are important, but in the rare of rare cases, obstructionism also has to be considered. And let's now look at the facts. Number one is, in the 2G scam, no wrongdoing was accepted by this government till the opposition finally decided enough of moving around, trying to cover up things, and took the matter really strongly in their hands. And then the Supreme Court intervened, in which Dr. Swamy played a very important role. And then you saw, we know what the result is. The same government which propagated...
Are you saying cancel 142 blocks?
Yes, well, I mean, certainly there are questions being raised here, and that's a demand that the party legitimately is raising. Now
has it come down from the Prime Minister's resignation?
No, certainly, if you will also hear Mrs. Sushma Swaraj's statement, you will also hear what Mr. Jaitley has said today. We have nowhere backed down from what the from the moral and constitutional
twin demand.
No, it's not about twin demand. Let's get this facts. I want to answer this. It's in context of Mrs. Sonia Gandhi calling up the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha and asking how does parliament function, and Mrs. Swaraj has clearly said it on the record that okay, you cancel you cancel the allotments, and after that order an independent inquiry. This could be a basis for discussing and debate, but we are nowhere backing down from the resignation of the Prime Minister. Mr. Jaitley said it today, Mrs. Swaraj has said it yesterday. Last point is, you are saying about us being isolated or not. Let's get the facts clear. We are talking about wrongdoing by the government. All the advice that we are hearing from Mr. Manish Shankar advice, he should give it to the Prime Minister, how to manage the coal ministry and all that. The fact is, let me just finish, then you can add to this. The fact of the matter remains, wrongdoing has happened. This is the CAG. There are no double standards here.
But wrongdoing that can also put BJP.
So do two wrongs make a right?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
But
you admit that this could be an all-party scam.
No, this is not an all-party scam. I'm sorry to say it. If you also read the CAG report in the screening committee, and I'm going to come to the issue of federalism second after that, in the CAG committee, in the screening committee, 2 people who were called for the presentation, 6 blocks were allotted. That's the CAG report saying. That's how it was a sham. A minister, Mr. Subodh Khan Sahai, writes a letter, and within 24 hours, the company on which his brother is a director gets 2 coal blocks. There are reports about Sri Prakash Jaiswal's relatives. And about federalism, I'd like to come on the last point of federalism, and then I'm leaving the house for any other debate on this. On federalism, it's very nice to be thought about the niceties of federalism when it suits the Congress party. When it does not suit, federalism goes literally out of the window. And therefore, it would be well not to have these double standards. The fact of the matter remains, wrongdoing is there and this government is accountable.
Okay, I'm going to slip into a quick break at this point because we know this discussion and debate can go on and on, as all of us are saying that we hope that we would see this debate on the floor of the House and not on national television channels. But on the other side of the break, we're going to discuss another very important issue, and this is with regard to CAG's calculations, because today yet again Mr. Kapil Sibal in an interview to NDTV has questioned the manner in which those calculations have been done. That's coming up after a quick break.
पहले ये दोनों प्रोब खत्म हो जाएंगी, उसके बाद किसी प्रोब की बात हो सकती है।
अपराधी थोड़ी ना तय करेगा कि उनके खिलाफ आरोप कौन तय करेगा और अपराध पता लगाने के लिए क्या प्रक्रिया होगा।
The point is, do you want to correct the system? Do you want to improve the system? Do you want to regulate the system? Or you want to keep the system in such an anarchy that people can keep making money? And this is crony capitalism. This is exactly what is crony capitalism.
Welcome back. Here with We Mean Business, and we're discussing whether or not the coal blocks should be deallocated and whether it will help diffuse the current political crisis. In an exclusive interview to NDTV, Kapil Sibal says the CAG lacks understanding of how the economy works and the auditor has misguided himself. He insists the CAG's loss calculations are flawed. Let's listen in.
The CAG talks about the 1.86 lakh crores. Right, that's the figure that the CAG computes as money that has been accrued to private companies, and it goes on to say the government could have reaped some part of this financial benefit. Do you agree with that assessment? And before you answer that, the government's own coal secretary in 2004 warned about windfall gains to private companies and pushed for competitive bidding. His opinion was ignored. This is as far back as 2004.
What is the basis of the calculation of the CAG of 1,85,000 crores? The basis is the following. that Coal India, a public sector company, if it extracts 1 ton of coal from a surface mine and incurs a certain cost, it sells that coal to a third party at a certain price. The difference between the cost and the price is the gain of the Coal India. Now, once you allocate blocks to private entrepreneurs, that gain is the gain for the private companies. And therefore, 1,85,000 crores is the gain. Right?
Yeah.
But the basic flaw in the argument is that this coal cannot be sold, unlike Coal India. Coal India can sell coal. This coal cannot be sold. So, you cannot compare apples and oranges. This coal has to be used as an input.
Yeah.
Input for what? For power. Input for steel manufacture, for cement manufacture. When you use it as an input for power, there is competitive bidding for power plants. And when under that competitive bidding, whoever offers the least tariff per unit of electricity to be sold to the electricity board wins the power plant. Right? Therefore, the gain and loss will be on the unit price per unit of electricity, not on coal. So there's a basic fallacy and flaw in the argument. That is also true of steel. The gain or loss will be when you manufacture 1 ton of steel. And then the gain and loss will be shown. And in the case of power, there is competitive bidding in the power plant. And also there is a commission under the Indian Electricity Act, which determines tariffs. If somebody actually imposes a high tariff which gives him too much profit, the commission comes in. So this whole concept of loss or gain is, with respect, I mean, I don't want to use strong words where somebody will say I'm attacking the CAG. I'm sorry, it's just a lack of understanding of how the economy works.
So you're saying the auditor doesn't understand how to audit. That's
I
effectively
don't
what
want
you're
to say
saying.
that. I just think that he has misguided himself for willy-nilly. I can't say anything more than that, because I have respect for the institution.
Respect for the institution, but a lot of questions being raised on CAG's methodology. Krishnamurti Subramaniam, a quick word from you, because there's been a lot of literature of late questioning really this presumptive loss theory of the CAG, simply going ahead and saying that, had you followed this policy, this would have been the loss, and this would have been the gain, and the entire question of the loss to the exchequer based on policy A or policy B, a logic that was also used in the 2G scam and actually went in favor of those who were arguing and questioning the 2G scam. But in this case, there are several who are questioning this methodology.
Yeah, Shweta, I want to explain here, there are 2 things that are involved. There is the output, which is electricity or steel, and there is the input, which is coal here, right? Now, the argument that Mr. Kapil Sibal is making is both right in some parts and wrong in some. Now think about essentially, you're contracting for the price at which you are essentially going to supply electricity or steel, but you do need coal essentially as a raw material to essentially to produce this electricity or steel. Now, if you are going to go and procure this coal in the open market, pay the open market price, you will pay whatever is the market price. So if instead you are getting this coal block, you do not have to go and pay that price. So what is the opportunity cost here? If you are not allocated this coal block, then you have to go and procure that coal in the open market and pay that price. That's the option. So what is the value that the company should be paying for acquiring this coal block? It is the present value of all the coal that is going to be used to produce either electricity or steel, and paying the market price. And that is essentially the argument that is being used. And here's where I want to come in, that similarly coal blocks were sold in Madhya Pradesh, in the same period, about 2000, in that period, and the price that was paid was in the region of 700 rupees per ton to 2100 rupees per ton. Now also remember, there is a classification of mines. There are mines that are open cast mines which are much more efficient than those mines that are underground. These are supposed to be loss making, not as profit making. And there are hybrid mines which have features of both open cast and the underground.
Okay,
what
so
we are talking
short,
about,
I'm running out of time. So just a quick word, yes or no, do you agree with the CAG's calculations or not? Do you agree with the CAG's calculations or not?
I
Yes
agree.
or no?
In fact, it is a conservative estimate. Let me just finish, because if CAG uses 300 rupees per ton.
Mr. Iyer, respond to that it is in fact a conservative estimate. In fact, it's not just our panelists saying it. There are sources within the CAG also who have said that, you know what, the estimate of loss that we've given is actually a conservative one. The number is going to be even higher.
I agree that there are many bases on which you can calculate what is being called presumptive loss, but which I think is meant by opportunity cost. And I would hope that we can get into a situation such as we have in petroleum, where we allow the product to be sold at international prices, but then we arrange that the final product is sold at a reasonable price, so that whatever is the difference is made up by subsidies from government. This is the fact of the matter, is that output has to be at a reasonable cost for the consumer, and inputs can best be accessed if they are allowed to be brought in at international prices. So we've got the excellent example of petroleum. At least it was an excellent example until I was there. I don't know what has happened subsequently. But that is the kind of model that we should be following. And I think the states need to recognize this. They haven't recognized this. They are the ones who prefer having the system that was set up in 1993. I wish we hadn't set it up in 1993, but we did. And I also would much prefer that the public sector be respected, that it be honored, that it be allowed to do its job, instead of being arbitrarily cut off and somehow the private sector being raised as if it was some answer to the prayer of the country. This private sector of India is an oligopolistic sector, and it works on the basis of crony capitalism. And I think there should be controls on the private sector instead of throwing open our markets to these people. They're an inefficient lot, and they're always looking for shortcuts. And I think we really ought to allow the Coal India Limited to fulfill the role that had been envisaged for it by Indira Gandhi.
All right, important points that have been raised by Mr. Iyer.
On the contrary, I think we should denationalize the coal sector, and the second thing we should do is that we should follow the
But given how private players have really performed in this sector, Mr. Taneja, is that a logical argument? They've let the country down.
We can't blame a concept or ideology for that. Look, we got to understand one thing. First of all, CAG is a constitutional authority. I think we should not be really running down a constitutional body like this. If you want to question CAG, or the government wants to question, or Mr. Kapil Sibal wants to question, set up an inquiry, come out with a credible inquiry, and then you can go and confront CAG in a proper way, in a constitutional way. I think it's not healthy. It's not healthy. The second thing is, you said the private sector company. Yes, sure, because the whole system, the way, for instance, these blocks were allocated, something was terribly wrong somewhere. We got to identify what really went wrong in a very transparent manner, and then make sure that the system, the right system, is put in place. We cannot really say it happened just because every single private sector company is
Okay, I need to make two quick points on
Yes,
this.
Nalin.
One is about the zero loss theory. We saw it, what happened with telecom, and from 1658 crores, now the base price is 14,000 crores. Second point I want to make is that yes, while Mr. Sibal was speaking, and I totally agree, you don't run down, and this government is repeatedly running down constitutional authorities wherever they find themselves in an uncomfortable position. And the last point I want to make, while the coal may not have been tradable, as Mr. Sibal was saying, certainly the shares of the company were tradable, and we have multiple cases where the shares of the company have got a windfall gain for the organization without coal. So there was no economic growth, and the point on which they were saying that yes, we needed to do it because we needed electricity, we needed GDP, none of that's happened. What's happened has been windfall gain for a number of organizations that have sold their shares or traded
But
it.
Dr. Swamy, my question to you is, and this question repeatedly came up at the time of 2G as well, and I know the logic does not hold in 2G, but here again, the main argument that is also being raised is the price of power, of electricity that we're going to see if we allow those auctions to take place. While in the case of telecom, it is still being debated whether mobile tariffs will go up because of the auction. Here, in this case, if we allow auction of all natural resources, isn't there a big worry about the cost to the consumer going up? And why is it that we always have a single-minded approach of revenue for the government? Because at the end of the day, we also allow subsidies. Then why allow subsidies subsidies, because that is also technically lost to the government.
Well, first of all, there was an auction in 3G, and the tariffs for phone-to-phone call is much less than for 2G. Let me tell you, these are the real question is when the resource was purchased. Well, it may not taken off, but the fact is the tariffs charged by the companies on their own accord is less than what they are charging for 2G. Go and see what the Tatas are doing with
for which prices have to be kept at certain levels.
Well, let's not argue about it. I'm just telling you that the real question is that you give a resource at a cheap price. Is there a bribe also? So in effect, there's a private auction. That's what we found in 2G. All these companies through share dilutions were reaping the amount through bribes. So therefore, lots of politicians get the money. We don't know what price ultimately the private parties paid. And today, you ask them to again go through an auction. Naturally, they are all very upset. They're saying we have already paid the market price. You're making us pay it again. This is not a clean operation. That's why we want it cancelled.
But sir, my question is, can it always be a single-minded objective of revenue for the exchequer?
It is already a part of, it is already Ashok, listen, why don't you listen a bit? It's already a part of government policy now because the Ashok Chawla committee has been adopted by the government. And they say that when it comes to natural resources for commercial exploitation, they should be auctioned. Now, period. There's no question of reopening that unless the government changes its policy.
All right, so clearly no obvious answers as to how we're going to see this entire political crisis really getting resolved. Mr. Iyer, a last word from you, because we're really seeing a stalemate that seems to be continuing. Are we going to see in the last few days of this session, any business happening in the last few days of this session? Is the government going to heed to the kind of pressure that the opposition party, principal opposition party, BJP is saying by cancelling some of those blocks? Where do we see this really going?
I don't think there will be any sitting of this monsoon session in the coming week unless the presiding officers do what the rules oblige them to do, which is to ask the marshals to pick up all those who are obstructing Parliament by the scruff of the neck and throw them out and allow Parliament to continue its work.
Well, I can only just simply say, if that's democratic traditions that Mr. Iyer wants to bring about the Congress, I think that's perfectly logical for him to speak that language. But we stand here and we are going to fight this battle because we are fighting for democracy. We are not fighting to catch anybody by the scruff of their throats and throw them out somewhere into the Arabian Sea or anywhere else. Our point is about misdemeanors have happened and we are not going to allow this to go.
How can
simply because the Congress party and the government does not like it.
I think it's important. Respect all constitutional bodies, very important. Respect Parliament, and at the same time, I think if BJP has decided to go the way they have decided to go, they have the right to do it. Of course, this war has to be fought politically, and it's very important we use the right language, and the right language not only in Parliament but also in TV studios.
And as we can see, this war seems to be continuing. The war of words that we can see right here on television channels, perhaps an indication of the worsening relationship really that we are seeing between the government and the principal opposition party, the BJP. Given what seems to be happening, we really don't know if we are going to see this monsoon session being a complete washout and any early resolution to the entire political crisis over that very, very controversial CAG report on coal block allocations. With that, it's a wrap here on We Mean Business tonight. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.